You know, we're always told that to know the future, you have to study the past. But what if, when it comes to something like investing, that's actually a really flawed idea? Today, we're going to break down this historian fallacy and explore why looking backward isn't the perfect map for the future we all think it is. This quote from Scott Sagan, it just cuts right to the heart of the whole thing. We are wired to look for patterns, right? To find comfort in what's happened before. But what if the most important events, the ones that literally change everything, are the ones with absolutely no precedent? That's the big idea we're unpacking today. Okay, so if history isn't a perfect guide, what is it? Well, probably the best way to think about it is as an imperfect map. Yeah, it can give you a general sense of the terrain, but it gets pretty dangerous pretty fast if you start relying on it for specific turn-by-turn directions. And this brings us to the core concept, the historians as prophets fallacy. It's this deep-seated belief that just because something happened a certain way in the past, it's gotta happen that way again. But in fields like finance or technology, where the whole point is to create things that have never existed before, while relying only on old data can be a total recipe for disaster. So, the first major problem with using history as our map is, you guessed it, the human element. Or, as we're calling it, when electrons have feelings. Because, let's be real, finance isn't anything like physics. Think about it. In physics, you've got these immutable laws. A rock or a kidney behaves the exact same way today as it did 1,000 years ago. It's predictable. But finance, oh, that is a whole different beast. It's driven by this messy, chaotic cocktail of human emotions. Greed, fear, nerves, paranoia. There are no universal laws there, just the constantly shifting feelings of the crowd. The brilliant physicist Richard Feynman just hit the nail on the head with this one. See, in the world of money and investing, the electrons do have feelings. We are those electrons, and our decisions, they're often anything but rational and predictable. And that leads us right into the second major flaw in our historical map. It completely, and I mean completely, fails to account for the radical game-changing surprises. Just think about the events that truly define the last 100 years. Were they the small market dips that everyone saw coming from a mile away? No way. They were the massive outliers, the things they call tail events, that seem to come out of nowhere and just change everything. The Great Depression, World War II, 9/11, these are the moments that truly move the needle of history. And you know what? It's not just events, it's true for people too. This number, it's just staggering. It represents that tiny, tiny fraction of individuals, people like a Bill Gates or a Martin Luther King Jr., who are responsible for a massive chunk of the world's direction. It's the outliers, again, that have the biggest impact. So how does this stuff work in the real world? Here's a wild but very real chain reaction for you. Who on earth would have connected the 9/11 attacks all the way to the student loan crisis more than a decade later? Almost nobody. But that is exactly how a world driven by surprises works. One completely unpredictable event sets off this crazy domino effect that no historical model could ever forecast. This all leads to a really important question. If history is just filled with things that have never happened before, how can we possibly plan for the worst-case scenario? Well, the short answer is, we're pretty terrible at it. See, our imagination is basically limited by our experience. Back in ancient Egypt, scribes just figured the worst flood would be, no worse than the highest one they'd already seen. Fast forward to 2011, the Fukushima nuclear plant was engineered to withstand the most powerful earthquake in Japan's recorded history. And in both cases, the unprecedented happened, and all that worst-case planning failed because it was based on an outdated map. So here's the crucial point, and it's summed up perfectly by the psychologist Daniel Kahneman. We shouldn't study past disasters just so we can predict the next one. We should study them to accept a much simpler but more profound fact, that the world will always find new ways to surprise us. All right, our third and final point is this. It's not just that history is full of surprises, it's that the rules of the game itself are constantly changing, which makes all that old data less and less relevant with every passing year. Just take a look at this timeline. It's kind of wild, right? So many of the financial tools we just take for granted are incredibly new. The 401k, the Roth IRA, even the modern S&P 500 index. So how can we use 100 years of data to predict a game where some of the most important pieces were only put on the board in the last 25 to 40 years? And look, this isn't just some academic theory. Even the absolute experts, I'm talking the very people who wrote the rule books, had to adapt. Just consider the case of one of the greatest minds the field has ever known. This is just a stunning admission. This is from Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, Warren Buffett's mentor. Near the end of his life, he basically acknowledged that the very analytical methods he pioneered were becoming obsolete because the world had just changed that much. I mean, if he could admit it, we certainly should too. Okay, so if history is this imperfect map and it's constantly changing and it's full of surprises, what is its real lesson? What good is it anyway? So, let's get to the question on your screen. After kind of tearing this idea apart, it turns out there is a really powerful, really productive way to use history. The key is you have to stop trying to use it to make specific predictions. The trick is to look for general takeaways, not specific trends. The further back in time you go, the broader your conclusions need to be. So don't study the 1920s to predict which tech sector is going to boom in the 2020s. Instead, study the 1920s to understand how people behave when they're totally gripped by greed and fear. Because those things, they're constant. They're absolutely timeless. And really, this is the best way to think about it. History doesn't give you a detailed turn-by-turn map of the road ahead. It can't. But what it can give you is a compass, a tool that helps you understand the general direction of human behavior and helps you get your bearings during times of uncertainty. And that's our key takeaway. The past is a powerful teacher of human nature, of hubris, and of surprise. But we have to be really clear about what it is and what it isn't. Historians are not prophets, so the real question for you is, are you using history as a map or as a compass? Thanks for tuning in.